Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to AM Impact on Your Health. AM Impact on Your Health, where every day our goal is to have you learn at least one thing to help you live better and longer. AM Impact on Your Health is heard each and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 to 9 o'clock. I'm Dr. Dennis Courtney, and I'm with you each and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 to 9. AM Impact on Your Health, where each day you'll find current medical news, knowledgeable guests, fascinating health topics, and of course, where we do encourage you to call in to join in. Folks, a real treat today. Breaking our mold for a Friday. Yes, it is a Friday. It is the first Friday in the month of November, 2012. We are going to be doing some special things on Friday, and there's no special way, better of a special way, to start off these Fridays than with the Godfather, the father, the founder, the inventor of something called LDA that you've been hearing about now for over a year. You've been hearing a lot about it recently, and we're just so honored to be able to bring to you the gentleman who invented LDA. His name is Dr. William Butch Shrader. He is our guest today. He is the Godfather, and we'll have to hear him describe how this all came about, how it is that LDA may be something you should be considering, and think outside the box. Yes, it's an immunotherapy, but it is not for just classical allergy, which I think you'll find out, and that by now you should be well aware of in just listening to our shows. So right after that first break, we'll be with Dr. Butch Shrader for the rest of the hour today. Now, as the month shapes up, and it is a pretty jam-packed month this month with guests, our guest on Monday, I just found out about a moment ago. Turns out that the Freedom of Choice of Cancer Therapy group is going to meet in the month of November. That's no surprise. Here are a couple surprises. Number one, it is not the third Thursday of the month. They're going to be with you next Thursday, the 8th. So that's a big switch. Make that switch on your calendar if you're used to going to those meetings. And the featured speaker is going to be a female by the name of Dr. Jerry Heyman. Now, I will try, because I just got this number a moment ago off of something left from me last evening. I will try to contact Dr. Heyman today to see if I can get her scheduled for Monday morning to give you an idea of what this could be about. She refers to herself as an alloologist. Alloologist. Yes, that'd be the study of the science of aloe. And so she's an herbalist. We'll bring her with you hopefully on Monday. I can't say for sure because I haven't had a chance to contact her yet. Then on Wednesday, Dr. Vavavoom is going to be back. I think we're going to be talking about astaxanthin. Since our last discussion with her, I've spoken to the people out there in Hawaii who raised the stuff and actually answered a big question for me. This astaxanthin is extracted. It is a purified form. We're going to be talking about that, I'm sure, on Wednesday with her. Next Friday, in keeping with this LDA theme, we're going to have Dr. John Wyckoff with us. He is a physician located in Lansing, Michigan, and we're going to be talking about one of the categories of LDA treatment, those related to the treatment of autoimmune diseases. And this is an area that heretofore I don't believe you've ever been exposed to, and we're going to have a gentleman who presented this very subject to us at our conference about 4 weeks ago in St. Petersburg, Florida. Dr. John Wyckoff, our guest next Friday. Now, Dr. Alan Greenberg, who was to be our guest just the other day here on Wednesday, and then we called, there was no Dr. Alan Greenberg to be found. Well, hey, we have to forgive the man. He lives in Maryland, and he got thumped. He got walloped by the storm with severe snowstorms. He had no electricity, no nothing. He couldn't call anybody. We certainly hope he's doing well now, and we have rescheduled him. He will be back talking about heavy metal detoxification. He'll be our guest on the 12th of November. How's it going so far? Then on the 14th, we're going to bring on the Heat again. The Heat, the group that does thermography, another group in Pittsburgh doing thermography, located here in the South Hills, trying to help them, get them promoted, because I want you to know you have an area in the South Hills that you have as a go-to, located on Fort Catch Road, just across, literally across the street from South Hills Village. We'll be talking with Michelle and Bethany again. See how the month of October went. Now that it's over, oh my goodness, National Breast Cancer Awareness Month is now in the history books for 2012. Let's see how it went for them. Then next Friday, the LDA theme continues. You're going to really enjoy listening to Kathleen Janelle, Dr. Kathleen Janelle, a naturopathic physician from the state of Washington, who at our conference really took on a category of diseases from her perspective as a naturopath, but showing how LDA can resolve these very serious conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. Heretofore, no real treatment available. Guess what? You'll love to hear her talk about her approaches, natural as they were anyway, now combined with LDA, and I think they really make an impact upon you. Then on the 19th of the month, it's as far out as I got to track, Luis Fabregas comes here with his book entitled A Transplant for Katie, a young lady who really did require a liver transplant, and you'll hear her story, of course, tragic as it, however, it ends, but a parallel story, a story that's under the radar, a story that's behind the scenes of what's wrong, if anything, with the transplant program at the University of Pittsburgh. He's an investigative reporter. You are able to read his columns every day in the Tribune Review. You'll love to see. I've read the book now, about 3/4 of the way through it, and I would encourage you to get the book at tribreviewlive.com. It's $14.99. You want to have it. I think it's just a well-written book, and it holds your suspense. It's sort of like one of the books like Coma or something like that. A medical thriller. Yes, that's what I wanted to say. A medical thriller, and that pretty much, as it stands right now, is the month of November. Now, rather than talking about any other issue, now that I've given you the idea of what's up and coming for the month of November, I want to take that first break because I want to get to our guest today. I'm excited. Hopefully you will be too. You'll be hearing about LDA, low-dose antigen therapy, from its inventor, Dr. Butch Shrader, when we return. This going in the vault. It's a platinum show, folks. Hope you enjoy it.
This is Dennis J. Courtney, MD. Have you become confused about how best to manage your health? It's no wonder. It seems that every time you turn on the television or radio, another expert has yet another suggestion for you to follow that seems to be reasonable enough, but no matter how dutifully you follow the instruction, it just doesn't quite produce the results that you are looking for. If this confusion sounds familiar to you, give us a call at the Center for Complementary Health, where we'll make some sense of the confusion based on a blending of traditional and alternative medicine that we've been perfecting over the last 7 years. We offer metabolic nutrition testing, immune system repair, natural hormone replacement therapy, chelation therapy, cutting-edge allergy correction, and a host of other safe and effective alternative therapies.
Dennis J. Courtney, MD, is located at 3075 Washington Road in McMurray. Phone 724-942-3002.
Do you have a mother, sister, or a daughter? I want to tell you about a new way to detect early signs of breast disease, thermography. It's non-invasive, there's no radiation, and it's painless. Thermal imaging offers a safe alternative for women and men in the earlier detection and monitoring of many diseases, namely breast disease. Other reasons to utilize thermography may be physical injuries and chiropractic issues. Your body may be sending you a message. Did you get the memo? HEAT, health-enhancing thermography, can read it. Early detection saves lives. Call us at 855-254-HEAT, 855-254-HEAT, or visit us at heat-images.com, heat-images.com.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back once again to AM Impact on Your Health. Heard here in KHB 620 each and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 to 9 o'clock. I'm Dr. Dennis Courtney with you today on a Friday morning version of our show. first Friday of the month of November, and we have a special treat for you today. We've been talking about this subject of immunotherapy and LDA in particular, low-dose antigen therapies. We've been doing it for over a year now with local talent, one Dr. Roy Carey, but the person, the individual, the source of all this information spills off of one gentleman. He is literally the inventor of a therapy called LDA. He is correctly referred to, by me at least, reverently, as the godfather of LDA. He is our guest today. His name is Dr. William Butch Shrader. I want to say good morning and welcoming to us and allowing us to interrupt his morning in Santa Fe, New Mexico at this early hour. Good morning, Dr. Shrader. Thanks for coming aboard.
Well, good morning, Dr. Courtney. It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, my goodness gracious. I was elated to hear that you would take me up on my request. Dr. Shrader, we have been talking about this therapy for as much as a year now. And I had the opportunity for the first time to meet you just a few weeks ago in a conference in St. Petersburg where I was really introduced to these concepts in a very in-depth way. Before we get to the actual discussion of LDA, which you certainly will be able to fill in many of the gaps that maybe I have left open, I'd like to hear a bit about yourself, Doctor. You're a physician, and if I saw it correct in your CV, you started this all out as a surgeon. Could you give us a little bit of background in your medical prowess and the things that you've done leading up to what we're going to be discussing today?
Sure, Dennis. I started into medicine as a general surgeon. I trained at the Queens Medical Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. I had gone to Hawaii to do my internship because my sister had lived there, and I'd gone to visit her before that, and I liked Hawaii, so a friend of mine and I from the University of Tennessee went over there to do our internships and our further training. At least I stayed for that. So I started general surgery, but when I went into practice at a plantation on the Big Island, I practiced both general surgery and family practice, which included delivering babies and emergency room work and the whole bit. And during that time, I got interested in allergy because all these people were having problems and nobody was doing too much about it except giving medication. So I was very interested in trying to help these people some other way. So I ended up going to Honolulu and studying some more with a couple of allergists and went back and started doing allergy.
Now that's why, I mean, that's a pretty sharp turn, Dr. Shrader, from surgery to moving into immunotherapies and allergy, but that's what you saw and that's what you had to treat, huh?
I think so. Surgery, is fun, but it's sort of end-stage medicine. You're getting there sort of after the barn door has been opened, and with treating allergy, and especially difficult problems that the regular allergists don't treat, you're really getting in on the bottom floor and actually preventing some bad things from happening.
Now, as you moved into the allergy realm, I'm going to imagine that you've probably delved into, or maybe really profoundly got involved with just about every immunosuppressive therapy, immunotherapy, maybe better said, allergic treatments that were possible. And so you've been working in this realm for so long. Sort of take us through the therapies to lead you to the creation of this newest therapy, the LDA. You've done every allergy therapy that there is, haven't you?
I have. I started out with scratch testing to inhalants only and started treating as a general allergist, which means basically you scratch test the patient to the different pollens and dust and so forth, and you usually do that on the back. And I remember back in the old days we used to make our own scratch testing needles by snipping off half of the eye of a surgical needle and sticking it in a rubber stopper into the vial so you'd have a scratchy end on it. But with that you could only treat inhalant allergy, and it was escalating dose. You'd have to find out what the patient reacted to on their skin, and then start out at an extremely low dose and then build up to higher doses over time. And it wasn't immediately effective, and it turned out that it worked pretty well for patients who had simple inhalant allergy. But most of the patients, I think, that a lot of allergists probably see, that doesn't really help well enough. They have to continue to take medications. They have to continue to do almost all the stuff they had to do before, except their symptoms are a little better during allergy season. So it really doesn't suppress all the symptoms, and I started looking for other causes. And of course, once you start looking, you find them pretty quickly, and generally that opened up the whole realm of food sensitivity and food allergy.
Yeah, this thing about foods, Dr. Shrader, whereas the inhalant, which is a revelation to me, by the way, as a medical doctor, to find out that the allergist really only ever could deal with, and continue even to this very day, deal with inhalant allergic responses only, sort of the immediate hypersensitivity reactions, never really getting involved at all with this category of the delayed, which the food category really occupies the vast majority of. There always, when I first had that revealed to me, I was shocked to think, hey, there's a group of allergies out there not even attempted to be treated by the allergy community. Wasn't that, I mean, to me, that was a revelation that I had never thought of before.
Yeah, it was to me too, and I didn't realize it, of course, until I started practicing it and seeing that my patients, some were doing pretty well, others weren't doing well at all. And I happened to pick a meeting to go to called the Pan American Allergy Society, and went to a Pan Am meeting in 1978 and learned about all this food and chemical and things that are going on. And from then I joined Pan Am, and I also went to an Academy of Environmental Medicine meeting, and they were talking about all that stuff and teaching you how to do it, and of course so was Pan Am. So I joined AAEM and began treating foods, and the method that they use at Pan Am and AAM is basically a method called provocation neutralization, where you test a food. The patient may or may not have symptoms or a growth of their skin reaction, and you actually find the exact dose that makes that reaction or their symptoms go away right at that moment. And then you put that in a vial with a whole bunch of other foods that you've tested, and patients then give those shots to themselves daily or every few days or once a week or however often they needed. And that worked quite well, except the problem with it was, of course, that it was very time consuming. It takes a long time to test foods. If you want to be thorough, you really have to test a bunch of foods. And it's very time consuming. The foods have to be retested at some regularity, because patients' food sensitivities will change over time depending on how much of the foods that they're eating. So I was really looking for a better way, because that way was, even though it was pretty effective, it was cumbersome, and there was no effective way to really treat the chemicals very well using provocation neutralization. So I was always looking for something better.
Now, it's apparent then that as you were searching for something better, you sort of were taking the benefits as they came and sort of had to live with what you really was outside the scope of being even possible. And then you, to jump forward maybe a number of years, finally meet a gentleman by the name of Dr. Len McEwen, and things really do take quite a turn at that point. You want to talk about that meeting and when you first met Dr. McEwen, and how it was that you thought his therapy may bring a bunch of additional positive components to this treatment of an immunological response?
Yeah, sure. Len is probably the most brilliant clinical allergist I've ever met. He still practices, as far as I'm aware, in London. He lives in Henley-on-Thames in the UK. And I met him through Leo Galland. There's a physician by the name of Leo Galland in New York.
Very familiar with him.
Yeah, has he been on your show?
Hasn't been on the show. I've listened to many of the shows that he has done. He's certainly not difficult to find. He's out there promoting when he does all over the place.
Yes, he's quite a character.
Yeah, well put.
And I didn't know him at all at the time, and I heard a tape of his at that point in time. There were tapes and not discs that he had spoken at a meeting treating chronic vaginitis, allergic vaginitis, and he was using something called EPD, and he mentioned it just briefly on the tape, and I said, well, that sounds interesting.
EPD?
EPD. Yeah, which turns out short for enzyme potentiated desensitization. And he and one other fellow near him, who he was sort of letting use the material, was the only one in the country. He was the only one in the country in New York at that point using this method. And I didn't know anything about it, and I called him up out of the blue, and he was nice enough to talk to me and told me what this was, that it was a great immunotherapy developed by an immunology gentleman in the UK by the name of McEwen. And so Leo and I basically emailed Dr. McEwen and talked back and forth and got him to come over to a clinic called the Princeton Biocenter in Princeton, New Jersey back in 1990. And he taught the first course on EPD, and there were about probably 14 of us there, I think. I had told all my colleagues around the country who were interested in it. And so a bunch of them came, and we all learned how to do this, and it was really quite amazing. One of the very impressive things about it, to me, I recall, was that McEwen had done a bunch of research into autoimmune diseases, notably rheumatoid arthritis and ankylosing spondylitis, and was treating those with other components of this material, which were actually, as I'm sure you've talked about on your program, mixtures of various things in the air, inhalants, foods, but there were also 2 bacterial components that he used at the time for treating rheumatoid and ankylosing spondylitis. And so basically, several of us from this first meeting started using it. It had to be shipped from England. We found out pretty quickly that that was not exactly legal. And so I started a review of a study that we put all the doctors into who were doing this. It was put under an institutional review board, or an IRB, in order to be legally supervised so we could import this material from England. And the IRB was an organization called GLACAM, a Great Lakes College of forgotten now, Advancement in Medicine, but it was very interesting. We had to report on it every year, and so we had to collect data, and as we collected more data, more doctors heard about this and became interested as I reported on the data at the GLACAM meetings annually, and also gave a few talks at the Academy of Environmental Medicine. So eventually there were about 100 docs in this study, and we ended up with about 10,500 patients. And that material's on my website. It has not been published yet. We're just now thinking of doing a little publication. But it was quite a miraculous method of treatment. I published a paper, I think it was somewhere in around 1993, about my limited experience with 142 patients at that time. And it just, people got more interested over time, and now there are doctors all over the country that are doing it.
Now this treatment, I mean, here you were really treating pure classical allergy there on the Big Island, and maybe by the time you did matriculate here over to the mainland, but nonetheless, these were inhalant kinds of issues, and then you had to move into other forms to get the foods in there. But how about finally seeing that you could utilize an immunological approach to treat things like autoimmune disease. Wasn't that a major thrill for you to think, hey, we can treat from an allergic viewpoint conditions such as these? Wasn't that a great revelation to think that it was even possible?
It was. And McEwen never went into tremendous detail about the Proteus Klebsiella antigens that he was using. He had mentioned some things, and so I started doing my own research. And it turns out that the primary principle of the use of that is something called molecular mimicry. And all that means is simply that certain bacteria that can be found in the body have very tiny parts of them that actually are the exact same protein sequence as on a special receptor that all of our cells in the body have. And so diseases that are associated with that receptor, like, for example, there's a receptor called HLA-B27 that all patients almost with ankylosing spondylitis have. And this certain receptor has been associated in the literature with a bacteria called Proteus. And so this is how McEwen sort of figured it out. And by George, I had a patient, my first patient with ankylosing spondylitis, and I used this material, and it actually stopped his pain and seemed to stop the progression of his disease. So it was amazing, and in reading, I found out that there were several other associations at that time. Since then, there have been many more, with other specific bacterial receptor sites that are of the HLA variety in the body, and so every autoimmune disease that has been identified with a receptor type is very likely to be involved in molecular mimicry, and there's very likely a material that can be used to treat it, either bacteria, a virus, maybe a food, something on that line, by specifically giving that as a separate part of the treatment. And since that time, I identified that Bacteroides, which is another bacteria that almost all of us have in our intestinal tract, is a large part of the anaerobic population, the bacteria that don't breathe air, is associated with reactive arthritis. So I got Dr. McEwen to produce a Bacteroides vaccine that was at a very specific dose, like all the other material that we used. And it seemed to work very well for patients where regular EPD, which is now LDA, didn't work. And it especially worked for people who had various types of arthritis that really didn't improve by treating their food problem.
Well, the fact that you and Dr. McEwen recognized that you could use an immunological approach to actually administer these bacterium to provoke certain responses. Let's talk about those responses, which I think are distinctly different as I now read them, and as you certainly did learn them to be, between how is it that either EPD, by the way, let's do this first. EPD, these three-letter combinations drive us crazy sometimes in medicine. I'm sure they drive our listeners nuts. But EPD has morphed itself into something called LDA. EPD really has been derived by Dr. McEwen. LDA, that's your baby. How did that come about, and why did it need to come about?
Well, that's a good question. And it really came about because finally the FDA, after visiting my office every year, at least once.
The men with the black hats kept coming to see you?
Yes. They didn't bring their guns or anything, but they always sent an investigator to my office to see what I was doing with this stuff. And after they found out enough times that what we were doing and that it was imported, they didn't like it. And so they got to the study that we were doing by shutting down the Institutional Review Board, which is a way that they can do things sort of behind the scenes. So once they shut down the IRB, because it wasn't following protocol perfectly, and of course no IRB practically ever is, they can always find some fault with it.
This is that study, by the way, of 10,500 patients. Isn't that what you're talking about?
Yes, it is.
Huge study, by the way. It's just a monumental study.
Yes, it was pretty spectacular, and the results were really quite dramatic, I thought.
But they didn't like it?
No, they hated it because it didn't come from America, you know.
Ah.
It was manufactured outside the USA, and so that's the problem. It was not an FDA-approved material. So they closed down the IRB, and we were sort of left high and dry. And fortunately, over the years, Dr. McEwen had given the approximate concentrations of the material, of some of the materials in the vaccines that he was using, the foods and the inhalants and even the bacteria. So I was really able to recreate at that point. This was it was about 2001, I think, that this all came down and the FDA made importing EPD illegal. And even though thousands of patients wrote letters to the FDA, they were having none of it. And because this wasn't FDA approved, they didn't want it out there. So we were able to recreate it here, and I got a lot of patient volunteers to try it because they were desperate. They didn't have their EPD anymore. And after a couple of rounds with making our own material, we got it pretty well perfected, and we had a compounding pharmacy do it who could do it on a much larger scale than I could. And so, excuse me. So basically, it sort of transposed itself into this new material, which I simply call low-dose allergen therapy, which is
LDA.
Yeah.
LDA. So EPD becomes LDA literally by consequence. It just couldn't happen any other way. The FDA shut down the free flow of the serum and the mixes to you from England. And when you keep saying we, I got to tell you, folks, very modest here, it was you who spearheaded this. This is truly your baby. I know that doctors were in there with you, but you took the lead on this one, Dr. Shrader, and you really need to be singled out as the father. You are the guy who originated LDA here, which now can flourish because, what, is it now recognized by the EDA? Is it legal here in this country now?
Well, it's legal, but it's not. It's still not recognized. Luckily enough, compounding is a very growing practice in this country, and compounding is really the way that pharmaceuticals started out. The doctor ordered something from the local pharmacy and said, "Hey, make this stuff up."
He mixed it.
Yeah, they mixed
more than
it
a pestle.
There. Yeah, there were some patent drugs around, patent remedies, but if a doctor wanted anything other than a patent remedy, he had to have the pharmacy make it. So that's really the way it all started in this country. So now compounding is much more widespread, especially in the past several years. It's grown dramatically, and the FDA does not like compounding. They make no secret of their dislike for compounding because, and they've set forth many rules for these compounding pharmacies, some of which are reasonable, others which are stupid, but nonetheless they're rules that the FDA says that are out there, although they're not necessarily followed by all the pharmacies that do this. But that's the way that we got around this, was through compounding, and compounding now has gotten a bad rap, as you've probably heard.
With that New England group, yeah.
Steroid bit, and the reason that happened is that the material is a suspension. It's a sterile suspension of steroids, methylprednisone probably most of the time. So, and that's very difficult for anybody to make. So there was a company that made it and stopped making it, and therefore there was tremendous demand for this deposited steroid with no manufacturer, and therefore it had to shift over to compounding. And since it's so hard to make, I think this one pharmacy who was making a lot of it had these problems. But without compounded stuff, people wouldn't be able to go get the steroid injections that they receive in their joints and their backs and so forth that are very common these days.
Well, that was still going to play itself out. It's pretty ugly how things can turn rotten when it comes to compounding. But to the subject of LDA, which is low-dose antigen, if I were to ask you to define it, and I know you do this so well, how would you like to tell the listener, what is LDA?
Well, LDA is a mixture basically of everything but the kitchen sink that we can give to people. And the reason that we use mixtures is because it prevents allergies from getting worse. One of the classic things when people have allergies is that over time they become allergic to more and more and more things, or sensitive to more and more foods. And the mixtures McEwen originally developed to prevent this recruitment, they call it in England, or spreading phenomenon. So that's why we use food mixtures, and food additives are in there, and food chemicals are in those mixtures. And in the inhalant mixture, it has all the pollens, molds, dust, animals, and so forth. So it's really a mixture of things that you're given. The enzyme that magically makes it work is called beta-glucuronidase. That's mixed with the material, and when you give that injection, it signals the local and regional lymph nodes to produce a very specific kind of lymphocyte in the bloodstream called a T cell. And in this case, it happens to be a T regulator cell, or it used to be called a T suppressor cell, that really regulates the activity of the other T cells in the bloodstream. And the other T cells, there's various kinds. One is called a T helper, and these are the ones that primarily produce allergies or sensitivities to various things, everything from ragweed to milk. By recognizing whatever the thing is, the substance is bad, and it tells the body to mount this big attack, and it's the T regulator's job to stop this reaction. And it does so in normal people, but in people with allergies or sensitivities, for some reason the T suppressors or the T regulators aren't doing their job, and all this immunotherapy does is produces those T cells by the millions that suppress this inappropriate response to these various things. And of course, the nice thing about using a cell-mediated approach with T cells is they live a long time. So this treatment only has to be done every 2 months at first, usually for 6 or 8 treatments, and then people stretch out to 3 months and 4 months and 6 months and so forth, because the cells, as you know, with a half-life like uranium, some of the uranium is gone, half the uranium is gone in X number of years, and then in that same number of years, half of the remaining is gone, and that same number of years, half the remaining. So the half-life can be quite lengthy, even if it sounds relatively short. The cells can be around almost forever.
Yeah, that really is a distinct difference. The allergy approach by allergists involving those inhalants you were talking about is a completely different realm of the immune system. It deals with antibodies, and they don't live all that long. That's why that stuff needed to be given like every week or twice a week. Patients were glad it was available, but it becomes rather cumbersome from the clinician and the patient viewpoint. Here with this LDA approach moving into cellular immunity, quite an advantage, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I think that's the basic major difference with regular immunotherapy. Of course, it doesn't work for foods, but for things like ragweed and so forth, once you stop giving it, the antibodies fall off pretty quickly, and patients' allergies generally will come back to some degree, or totally after a year or two. LDA, there's the nice thing about it is that half of the patients in our study were able to stop completely after, it's usually an average of between 16 and 18 treatments, or over a period of about 5 years. So it has a distinct advantage in that it can be a finite treatment, and even those patients that have to continue it, like myself, for example, I still only do my treatments now about once every year and a half or so. I don't know when my last one was, and I'm still fine except for this cold that I have today. But it's really remarkably different, and I think majorly so in treating food problems and numerous autoimmune conditions that really can't be treated any other way except with heavy-duty immunosuppressant drugs.
I looked over the vast literature you put out. One of them that keeps capturing my attention is this list of 66 different conditions. And if I understand correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, when you did your 10,500 patient study, folks, that's monumental in this world of trying to put some study together. 10,500 is this unbelievable, as far as I'm concerned, generated from one man like you. You have 66 conditions that ended up being treatable with this. Probably didn't even note at the beginning that it could be. Talk about the vast range and wide scope of these diseases, many of which heretofore never were considered to be treatable conditions from an immunological viewpoint.
Yeah, well, there certainly were a lot of them, and of course I can't remember all of them.
I understood, yes.
As I get older, I'm lucky to remember 2 or 3 of them.
There were 66 of them there. I look at this list in amazement all the time. I've brought it up to my listeners many times, too. I've actually put them into categories because they were sort of all over the board, but nonetheless, what a powerful statement to be able to bring to people who don't. There is no treatment out there for it. I think of those autoimmune conditions that you've already mentioned. No real treatment for it. All those GI conditions, like from mouth to anus, literally anything that could go wrong could be associated with a food, And by virtue of it, there could be an allergic reason for you to have all those symptoms. And correctably, through the use of LDA, people don't have to suffer from these conditions anymore in a high percentage of the cases. Tell me about the response rate. Maybe that's a good way. How if people listen to us right now and they're saying, geez, I wonder if that would work for me. Well, you did 10,500 patients. How did that break out? What percentage of people did get better or improved or whatever?
Well, I think overall the study data showed somewhere around 77 to 80% if you take all the conditions together, and some of the response rates. Some of these conditions we were sort of guessing at when we first started this treatment, and it turns out some didn't respond extremely well, like multiple sclerosis, for example. But the overall response rate was about 77 or 78%. When you look at the response rate of eczema or allergic dermatitis, almost of any kind, the response rate is way over 90%, for example.
Phenomenal for something that has no definitive treatment. Phenomenal.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Patients go to the dermatologist and get their steroid creams and have to put them on forever until their skin thins and they can't use the stuff anymore. And there's actually a treatment that works almost all the time for it.
Now, when it comes to these injections, you say you currently, because you must have had allergies yourself, it appears that you responded, and at this point, you need to get one of these shots, just an intradermal. By the way, the word shot sometimes scares people. This is just an intradermal wheel, a bubble you bring up of the serum underneath the skin. You literally can see it sitting right there. So it's not a major, thrust into the anatomy, as the word shot may convey. But you take one of these so-called shots once every 18 months. Wouldn't you say, if you were plagued by serious dysfunction based on immunological response, by the time you only have to treat it once every 18 months, you really don't have the condition at all anymore to worry about, do you?
I would say that's close to true. It's not uncommon for people to get 100% better with this treatment. There are usually some lingering minor symptoms that don't totally go away or that start to come back, and that's how patients know they need another treatment. But it's dramatically better than than it was when they started. And it's one of the reasons that we put so much effort into the study, is to try and find questionnaires that really treated conditions fairly and get a level of response from people on how well they did. And people always tend to underrate their response to things. When they come in, for example, I'll ask a patient, well, how are you doing? And they'll say, oh, I'm okay. I wish I were better, and I still have this problem. And they list their 2 or 3 problems. The thing that happens is they don't list their 10 problems that are gone, but they do list their problems that they notice. So it was sort of a difficult study to design to get the perfect response, and I think the results are probably a little underreported because of that. But it's still dramatic.
Let me ask you this question, Dr. Shrader. For many who are listening to us right now and their antennae are up, they are really receptive to the intrigue, the allure of such a treatment as anyone would or should be. They're currently doing treatments on their own right now, getting various degrees of response, some of which allow them to just get by. How does the use of LDA treatment interplay or interfere, or does it interfere with current treatments? Can you do LDA and still march along with your current treatment so that you get the best of both worlds to try to find out if this works for you? Do you have to give up your treatment? One would say, great if you didn't have anything to treat anymore, but what happens in this interim between when you meet a patient and when you finally get to that 18-month mark?
Well, generally people who are on traditional immunotherapy, which is basically very high-dose treatment that has certain risks involved, as you know, with it. But people that are on that have to stop it before they start LDA.
So if you're getting allergy treatments, these two don't work. You can't mix them both, okay?
Correct. So
you make a decision, a conscious decision, to move to LDA and give up your immunotherapy. That must be a problem for some, huh?
It's a problem, but most people that are on that type of immunotherapy that come to see me aren't doing that well on it, which is why they came to see me in the first place. So most of them don't mind stopping a treatment that's not working all that well. And generally LDA will work quickly enough, very often, even with the first treatment, so that they get enough relief so that they know, wow, this is really going to be helpful for me.
Now, that's with someone who has an existing inhalant kind of a problem and is being treated by an allergist. With that long list of 66 conditions, so many of which aren't even attempted to be treated by the allergist, I'm talking about the autoimmune disease. I'm really referring to the GI disorders. People were taking all sorts of prescription medications. Do you have to quit taking those meds in order to do LDA?
Very often you don't. Sometimes you do. There's a booklet that's available for patients that we use for all of our patients that lists the medications that they're taking that may interfere. For example, regular antihistamines, like the ones that are available over the counter and by prescription that people take for allergy, do interfere with the treatment. So you can't use those for the 3 weeks after your treatment every 2 months or so, because they interfere with the development of the T cells that we're looking to stimulate. So there are certain medicines that have to be avoided around the time of the treatment for that 3-day period. Usually we try and get patients off of all their medications that they can stop because of the theoretical risk of sensitizing to those medications, although we've never really seen that. So patients who really have to take a daily medication usually just take that all the way through if they can't do without it. If it's a medication that interferes severely, like aspirin, for example, then we find some suitable substitute that they can take for those 3 days, or that they can take during the 3 weeks after the treatment where they can't take certain other medications.
That 3-day period, this so-called LDA diet, and now including the issue of certain medications, this is a tried and true way to make sure that the day before, the day of, and the day after, no allergens are going to bombard the patient's system, that you're going to be sort of allergen-free other than the ones administered by the serum. Is that the idea behind it?
That's the idea. With EPD and LDA, the exact dose of each material that you're getting, each food that you're getting, is very precise. So McEwen's research really looked into the various doses of all this material, and he found the optimal doses and the optimal combinations of things to use to desensitize people. So his idea was that if you're going to give this precise a dose, it might be harmful for the patient to be eating certain foods, and it turned out that that was usually the case. So he came up with the LDA diet, which, as you know, is very limited for that 3-day period, with foods that he found over a period of years didn't seem to interfere with the treatment.
And I found I had to get my first injection just last week myself. That diet composed really of foods that are sort of strange, that aren't common foods. I think that pretty much is how you got to look at it. You found foods that you can eat and get through over those 3 days that really have a low immunological potential, okay, to provoke immunological response. And I did quite well for those 3 days. Most people do. And every time you get an injection, if it's 2 months later or if it's a year later, every time you're going to get one, you have those 3 days to contend with where you're on an LDA diet and your issues of whatever meds you may be on are an issue at that time, correct?
That used to be totally correct. Nowadays, there are some doctors around the country who are treating primarily autistic children with this treatment. And as you know, autistic children are very limited sometimes with their ability to eat certain foods. So there's one doctor in particular in Maryland who's treating autistic kids, and he's not having them do the diet. So they're eating their regular foods, the foods that they'll eat, so they don't starve to death. And they seem to be doing well for the most part. I think adults probably don't do as well if they don't do that, and sometimes do horribly if they don't do that. But at least he's found that his autistic kids can get away with eating other foods that maybe other people can't. So the diet is recommended by most of us who do this, but there are a few doctors who are experimenting with other foods and seeing how well people do.
So there's more information to come. We're still in the baby stages of this LDA, or not. I mean, when you figure that you put this in play, you said, I think, 2001. Hey, this is 10, 11 years later. This is still infancy stage. So who knows what this may morph into? Wouldn't you agree?
I would think so. I mean, we know by now that it's very safe, that it works most of the time, but there are always new things down the pike. And there's a very interesting doctor by the name of Ty Vincent in Alaska that you heard.
Yeah, he's very interesting to say the least. Sure.
Yeah, Ty's a great guy, and he's a maverick. He likes to try things, and so he's actually using various extracts of bodily fluids to treat certain conditions. For example, he actually will use stool, which obviously you can sterilize before you give it, for treating certain almost impossible to treat conditions. And I've been excited about that for the past 2 years, because that's taking the molecular mimicry model the next step. And the big deal with LDA is the dose of whatever you're using has to be very close to perfect. And he spent the last couple of years trying to find the doses of these bodily substances that usually work for these various extremely difficult conditions. And I think he's done a good job, and I'm about ready to jump in myself with treating some extremely resistant problems with
must feel very good when you see the Dr. Vincents of this world emerge to take this therapy and take it to the next step. We're going to be graced by the presence of a couple of your disciples in the up-and-coming weeks. For instance, Dr. John Wyckoff is going to be our guest next Friday. The Friday after that, Kathleen Janelle. These are all presenters at your last meeting, and I think my listeners are going to really enjoy hearing how the Godfather's work have touched others and the success that they're getting. We have what we call the bongo moment. There are bongos going off in the background, Doctor. This indicates it's our time out of here right now. I want to say that I'm so thankful that you took the time to interrupt your day at the beginning of it to come aboard with us, that the LDA concept is gonna thrive here in Western Pennsylvania, and hopefully maybe you'll allow me to interfere with you some other time in the distant future. Fair enough?
Well, it's very possible, Dr. Courtney, and thank you for having me on. It's been my pleasure.
All right, there you have it, folks. Don't forget, Monday I'll be back with you. Until then, this is Dr. Dennis Courtney with Dr. William Butch Shrader saying so long for AM Impact on Your Health.
AM Impact on Your Health is sponsored by Dennis J. Courtney, M.D., Director of the Courtney Medical Group, located at 3075 Washington Road in McMurray, Pennsylvania. For more information or to make an appointment, call 724-942-3002. That's 724-942-3002.